Hi, everybody. Today I wanted to read one story from a collection of stories, which is called "The Girl Who Dreamed Only Geese." The stories in this book are all Inuit stories, and they are retold by Howard Norman, who's not himself Inuit, but he worked closely with Inuit storytellers in writing these. Um, so yeah, and then it's illustrated by Leo and Diane Dillon, who were a husband and wife. Leo is no longer alive, but Diane still is. They worked together on their art. Um, and I actually edited this book when I still was working as a children's book editor before I became a teacher. So it's a book that I know and loved working on. And one thing that's pretty cool about this book is the art. And in this book, there are some pieces of art, like on this page, which will be in our story, that look like you'd see art, beautiful art, but art that you would see in lots of different story collections, like it's, a piece of color art across from a page of text. But there's another kind of art in this book. There actually are a couple of things that are cool. So one of the things the Dillons decided to do was to create black and white kind of friezes across the top of any page that didn't have an illustration like this. And these illustrations were the style of these illustrations were inspired by Inuit stone cut art. And in this, the Dillons tried to capture all of the events that were described in the words. So while you're listening to the story, on the pages that have the black and white art, you can see if you can follow all of the different events. And this was a big job for the Dillons to create this, because you can see it's really detailed, but there also are a lot of pages in this book. So it ended up being a huge amount of art. And for this book, there are 118 different pieces of artwork that they created for this book. So it was really a huge, huge project, but very fun to work on. The story that I'm going to read is called "The Man Who Married a Seagull." Far north, between two inlets, lived a seagull and her two uncles. She liked to circle over the nearby Inuit village. She liked to watch what the human beings did all day. One morning she said, "Uncles, I want to become a human being." "Why?" asked one uncle. "Because I'm curious," she said. "And what else?" asked the other uncle. "Because you treat me badly," she said. "You steal my food, and you peck at me so often my feathers are torn and shabby, which makes it difficult to fly, and the way you whistle through your nostrils annoys me." "Very well," said one uncle, "but some day we'll come to fetch you back." The uncles worked some magic and turned their niece into a beautiful young woman. The uncles flew off. They keened high in the air. Then they were gone. The young woman stood on a drift of ice. And there she is. Now it happened that a very fine and handsome young hunter was out in his kayak looking for seals nearby. He squinted his eyes, staring up ahead. He was surprised to see what at first he thought was a seal standing on its flippers. As he paddled closer, he saw it was a beautiful young woman dressed in a coat of gull feathers. He maneuvered his kayak around drifts of ice, and when he drew up to her, he said, "How did you get out here? Where's your kayak?" "What's important is that I'll go back to your village with you," she said. The man certainly agreed. She climbed into the kayak and he paddled north along the coast to his village. When they reached the village, they got out of the kayak. "Let's go meet my mother and father," the man said. "Wait," said the young woman. "Do you want to marry me?" The young man did not have to think very long. "Yes," he said. "Then go get me some clothes," she said. "I can't bear this feather coat." "All right," the man said. He hurried into his village. He went into his cousin's house and said, "Cousin, the woman I'm going to marry has only a shabby, flea-ridden coat made of gull feathers. She's standing at the edge of our village right now. Can I have one of your coats and a pair of boots? If I don't bring these to her, I'm sure she won't marry me." His cousin gave him the clothes. He ran back and handed the coat and boots to the young woman. She put them on, then threw her feather coat into the sea. It drifted away. The wedding took place the next day. The new couple moved into a small house on the riverbank, just inland from the sea. The man was a great hunter. He brought in seals and fish. His wife plaited fishing line expertly, and she often caught fish from the riverbank. They had many visitors, and they visited the man's parents often. This is how life went. They were happy. The only sadness was that the husband's two uncles had been whirled to the sea bottom by a waterspout early in the summer, and he missed them terribly. Winter came. They lived through it well, and then it was close to the ice breakup. One day, the husband went to where the river met the sea, his favorite seal hunting spot, and his wife went to fish from the riverbank. While she was busy fishing, she looked up and saw two gulls floating high in the air. Greatly alarmed, she ran home. Her husband came back without a seal, but with 5 large fish. Right away, his wife prepared them. The husband sat and talked with her. They were just talking when suddenly they looked up and saw 2 men standing in their doorway. The husband leapt for his harpoon, then stood with it at the ready. "I don't recognize you," the husband said to the men. "We are your wife's uncles," one of the men answered. "Uncles," the man said. "My wife never mentioned that she had uncles. How do I know that you're telling the truth?" One uncle held out the shabby feather coat. "You see," he said, "we found our niece's coat far out to sea. We wondered as to her whereabouts. We've been searching for her. Finally, we came here." "That's her old coat, all right," the husband said. He turned to his wife. "Are these your uncles?" "Yes," she said. She had been so happy. She could not bear to tell her husband that she was a gull and that these were gull uncles too. "Very well," the husband said. "Uncles, uncles, we need uncles around here. My own uncles were drowned by a water spout." "That's bad news," one of the visiting uncles said. "Come in, sit down," the husband said. "We have plenty of fish. Stay for a meal." The uncles each sat in an opposite corner. The husband noticed that they had very thin faces. His wife placed the fish in the middle of the house. "Visiting uncles," the husband said, "go ahead, eat." One uncle circled the fish, then all but pecked at one, finally pinching off a small bit without using his hands at all. Once he had this tiny piece in his mouth, he quickly retreated to his corner. But no sooner had he done so than the other uncle swooped across and nabbed the fish bit right from his mouth. The thieving uncle then flailed the air with his arms, scurried back to his own corner, and quickly gobbled down the bits of fish. "Uncles, uncles," the husband said, startled. "There's more than enough food for everyone. No need to fight over it." Still, this went on throughout the meal. One uncle would warily eye the other, then suddenly snap up a piece of fish. When the wife, husband, and uncles finally had their shares, one uncle said to his niece, Hey, where are the intestines?" "I scraped them out," the young wife said. "I threw them to our dogs." "What about the eyeballs?" asked the other uncle. "And where are the fishtails?" "All to the dogs," said the woman. "You've forgotten how to prepare fish properly," the other uncle said. "You'd better come back to our village with us right away." "I wouldn't even let my wife visit a village where they eat fish intestines," the husband said. "Why not leave now, uncles?" said the wife. "It's clear that I can't prepare fish the way you like. You're not pleased. Why not leave?" "How long do you expect to stay, anyway?" the husband asked. "Just a few days," one uncle said. "Very well, then," said the husband. "Ungrateful uncles are still uncles, and next time we'll leave the fish intestines, eyeballs, and tails for you. But you must eat them outside where we don't have to watch." That night, the husband and wife slept in their customary place. The uncles started out falling asleep in separate corners, but in the middle of the night, the husband heard a sound like a broom brushing atop the house. He went outside. Looking up, he saw the 2 uncles, eyes closed, sitting upright on the roof. They each had on feather-tipped mittens and were moving their hands slightly in sleep, which accounted for the noise. The husband went back inside. He lay down and stayed awake all night listening to the uncles on the roof. The husband found much of this strange, but said nothing of it. The next morning he said, "I'm going to hunt seals." Carrying his kayak, he set out. As soon as he was out of sight, the uncles walked in and began to talk. They chattered, gossiped, and complained all day. All day, chatter, gossip, complaints. What's more, when their niece went out fishing and returned with 10 fish, the uncles immediately stood on the fish, bending down and tearing them apart with their teeth, snapping the skin off and letting pieces fly and spatter the walls. The uncles ate the entrails, stomach, eyeballs, and tails, too. The niece scrubbed the walls, all the while harangued by the uncles, who chattered and would not stop. Finally, she lay down and fell asleep. She suffered from uncle exhaustion. She tossed and turned in uncomfortable sleep. The uncles sat in opposite corners, gabbing and nostril whistling. Now it happened that all this time the husband was out in his favorite seal hunting inlet. It was the beginning of the great ice breakup. It was still bitterly cold out, but the sun was shining for longer each day. It had been nearly a year since the man had first seen the beautiful woman out on the ice. Already much of the inlet was clear of ice, but still great jagged floes were about, and the man had to be careful, for if he got too close, a floe could suck him under. He had just broken into a clear stretch of water when he saw an unusual thing, a kayak full of ghosts. Now he had heard about such a sight since he was a child. His mother and father had each said, "One day you might see a kayak full of ghosts." A number of other hunters had reported seeing one too, but none of the others said they had gotten this close. The man was frightened, but he was curious too. Finally, he decided to paddle right up to the ghost's kayak. As he drew near, the ghosts looked directly at him. Then, speaking in a single voice, the ghosts said, "Your wife is a gull." Without another word, the ghosts paddled away. The man admired the way they guided their kayaks so effortlessly around the jagged floes. All the rest of his hunting day, the man pondered what the ghosts had said. The words, "Your wife is a gull," kept swirling around in his mind. Your wife is a gull. Your wife is a gull. Your wife is a gull. That day the man caught some fish, but he didn't catch a seal. When he returned home, the young man saw that his wife was asleep. "Asleep, and it's not yet supper time," he said. He jostled his wife awake. "Wife, are you ill?" "No," she said, "I'm uncle exhausted." "Let's kick them out then," the husband said. Right away, the husband pushed the uncles toward the door. They fought him with all their might. The uncles pecked at him and beat at his shoulders with their arms. The uncles were wearing down the husband, exhausting him, but he managed to get them outside and shut the door behind them. In a short while, the wife threw a biscuit out. She and her husband watched as the uncles fought over every crumb. The husband and wife were uncle exhausted down to their very bones. Too tired to even eat supper, they lay down and went to sleep. But in the middle of the night, the man woke to a crunching sound. Pretending still to be asleep, he peeked open his eyes and saw his wife picking clean a fish skeleton, using only her teeth. He closed his eyes but could not sleep. Soon his wife lay down next to him again. Early the next morning, when the man stepped outside, he noticed that it was much colder than the previous day and that snow had fallen. It seemed that winter had come back full force. Some years it happens that suddenly the inlets freeze up even though it's almost summer, and then people have to wait for a second ice breakup. The man harnessed up his sled dogs and set out to hunt seals. Far from home, he saw the kayak full of ghosts again, paddling between jagged floes closing up fast. He snapped his whip above the dogs, drove them out on a peninsula of ice, drawing close to the kayak. He now saw that the kayak was trapped between floes of ice. The ghosts had been caught by the sudden freeze-up. "The visitor uncles are gulls too," the ghosts said. "They want to take your wife and turn her back into a gull again. They have such magic. Chisel us out of the ice and we'll tell you how to get rid of the gull uncles." "Very well," said the man. He chiseled and chiseled, finally breaking the kayak loose. When they were free, the ghosts said, "Don't feed the uncles inside your house. Instead, scatter biscuits and fishtails down by the sea. We will make the air colder and colder and colder yet. What happens next will please you." "Goodbye then, ghosts," the man said. "Goodbye, hunter," the ghosts said. "Don't feed the uncles inside your house. Don't feed the uncles inside your house. Don't feed the uncles inside your house," the man sang as he traveled back to his house. When he got home, the man saw that his wife had let the uncles back inside. She was asleep. The gull uncles had covered her with a feather coat. Angered by this sight, the husband pulled the coat away and threw it outside to his dogs, who tore it to pieces, feathers flying every which way. Despite all the commotion, his wife was so tired she did not even wake up. The man took some biscuits and fish, then left the house. Outside, he cut off the fish tails, tossed the fish themselves to the dogs, and just as the ghosts had instructed, scattered the biscuits and fish tails down by the sea. Then he returned home. Uncles, he said, there's no more food in my house, but there are biscuits and fish tails down by the sea. The gull uncles chattered excitedly, then hurried out. Keeping out of sight, the husband followed. At the sea edge, the husband hid behind a boulder and watched the uncles quarrel over each biscuit. They skirmished over each fish tail. They were so busy fighting and arguing, they failed to notice how cold it was getting. Ferocious winds careened off the sea ice. Even while buffeted by the wind, the uncles kept on fighting over the last biscuit. They were getting worn out. It sometimes happened that the uncles could exhaust each other. In such plunging cold, the gull uncles' breaths were puffing out and forming fog capes over their heads. The breaths were becoming solid now, icing up, settling hard on the uncles' bodies. Breath after struggling breath fogged out of their nostrils and mouths, hardening fast in the cold air. As they became weighted down by capes of their own frozen breaths, the uncles were less and less able to move. Finally, they were frozen all the way through. The gull uncles had frozen. To finish things off, the ghosts worked more magic and turned the gull uncles into rocks. Today, you can still see those very rocks at the edge of the sea. It had gotten so cold that the husband could barely trudge home. He almost froze in his tracks. Still, he managed to get to his house and push open the door. Immediately, he saw his wife choking, and when he reached into her throat, he pulled out a complete fish skeleton. "Thank you, husband," she said. "Do you ever want to become a gull again?" the husband asked. "I'm ashamed I didn't tell you before that I was a gull," she said. "Still, no, I want to stay a human being." "Fine then," he said. "You look cold and tired," she said. "Did my uncles wear you out again?" "Yes," he said. "Where are they?" she asked. "Down at the sea edge," he said. "Will they be having supper with us?" she asked. "No," he said. "They are rocks now. They won't be having supper again at all." "I see," she said. "We'll have a good meal together. Tomorrow, let's go down to the sea and watch for the ice breakup." "Good idea," the husband said. The next morning, early, the husband and wife sat near the uncle-sized rocks and watched the ice breakup. "An ice breakup, a freeze-up, a second ice breakup," said the wife. "That is a lot to see in one spring, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," said the husband. They sat a while. In the far distance, they saw the kayak full of ghosts drift out to sea. Then they went home. The wife never turned back into a gull. In time, the husband and wife had a daughter, then a son, then another daughter, none of whom were gulls. And that's the end of that story. I hope you enjoyed it. It's kind of different from European folk tales, but it's one that I find really interesting and intriguing. I hope you did too, and I will see you guys soon. All right.
I'm so tired.
Yeah.